Darnell Price had one jacket to survive a Chicago winter. He had $6.20 to cover $47 in medication. And he had a grandmother at home who still believed he'd walk through that door with her insulin before midnight. The jacket wasn't clothing anymore. It was a decision. Warmth or kindness. His body or a stranger's. Around him, people stood in warm coats, headphones, in scrolling phones. Nobody looked at the old man shaking at the end of the bench. That's when he heard it. Not a voice. Not a cry. Teeth rattling against each other. The jagged breathing of someone trying not to collapse. He turned. He didn't know it then, but the man he was about to give his jacket to had once held him as a baby and whispered his name for the very first time. The apartment on the second floor of a brick building in Englewood had 3 radiators. Only one worked. The kitchen linoleum had been peeling since before Darnell was born, curling up at the edges like it was trying to escape the floor. The refrigerator hummed a low, uneven sound that sometimes woke him at night, and the kitchen table had a burn mark shaped like a half moon from a pot that slipped sometime in the 90s. Nobody remembered the exact year. The mark just stayed. Darnell Price lived here with his grandmother, Pearline Price. She was 71 years old. She had type 2 diabetes that was getting worse by the month. Her ankles swelled, her vision blurred on bad days. She needed insulin that cost $47 a vial, and she needed it like breathing. She was all he had. His mother Shanice died when Darnell was 3. Lupus. The kind that attacks quietly then all at once. Darnell didn't remember her face from life, only from the one photograph on the living room wall. A young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile holding a baby who didn't know yet what he was about to lose. His father was a different kind of gone. Raymond Price left when Darnell was 14 months old. Not dead, just disappeared. No forwarding address, no birthday cards, no phone calls, nothing. Darnell didn't have a single photograph of his father. Not one. He knew the name. That was it. Raymond Price. 2 words that meant nothing because they'd never been attached to a face or a voice or a hand on his shoulder. Pearline never talked about him. If Darnell asked, her jaw tightened, and she'd say something like, "Some people aren't built for staying." Then she'd change the subject. Every time. So Darnell grew up in that apartment with the one working radiator and the humming refrigerator and a grandmother who loved him with everything she had left, which was a lot. But love doesn't pay electricity bills, and it doesn't buy insulin. Every morning, Darnell rode the CTA bus to school, 42 minutes each way. He got free lunch in the cafeteria, same as most kids in his school. But some days, he'd skip the milk and slide it into his backpack. Not for himself, for Pearline. Because milk cost $3.19 at the corner store, and that was $3.19 they didn't always have. His jacket, the one he wore every day from October through March, came from the Salvation Army donation bin on 63rd Street. It was 2 sizes too big. The zipper stuck halfway if you pulled it too fast. The color had faded from black to something closer to charcoal gray. But it was warm, genuinely warm. The kind of warm that made the difference between getting home okay and getting home shaking. Darnell treated that jacket like other kids treated their phones. He hung it on the same hook every night. He checked the pockets before bed. He never left it at school. Because he understood something most 14-year-olds didn't have to understand. When you only own one warm thing, you protect it. Some nights after Darnell finished his homework at the kitchen table and Pearline turned off the television, the apartment got quiet in a specific way. The radiator clicking, the wind outside. And if Darnell listened carefully from his room, he could hear Pearline's nightstand drawer open, slowly, like she didn't want him to know. He'd heard it maybe a dozen times over the years, always late, always when she thought he was asleep. The sound of paper being unfolded, a long silence. Then, the drawer closing again. He never asked what was in it. He figured everyone had something they looked at alone in the dark. That Thursday afternoon, Pearline sat in her chair by the window with a blanket across her knees. Her blood sugar had been high all week. She looked tired in a way that scared him. "Darnell, I need you to go to Walgreens and pick up my prescription. It's paid for already. They're holding it at the counter. Yes, ma'am. He grabbed his jacket from the hook. She watched him put it on. Zip it all the way up. It's 28 degrees out there. I know. And Darnell. She looked at him with eyes that carried something heavier than usual. Keep that jacket on. Don't you take it off for any reason. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. She held his gaze one beat longer than normal, like she was trying to memorize his face, or maybe like she was seeing someone else's face underneath it. Then she looked away. Go on now. Be safe. He walked out the door, down the stairs, into the cold. He had no idea that in less than 1 hour he would break the only promise his grandmother had asked him to keep. The bus stop on Halsted Street at 5:15 in the evening in November was the kind of cold that didn't argue with you. It just won. The sun had already dropped behind the rooftops. The streetlights buzzed on, throwing pale orange circles onto wet concrete. The wind came from the north, steady and sharp, the kind that found every gap in your clothing and punished you for it. Darnell stood near the bus shelter, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. His fingers curled around the pharmacy bag. Pearline's insulin. $47 worth of staying alive, sealed in a white paper bag that weighed almost nothing. The number 8 bus was 11 minutes away, according to the digital sign. 11 minutes in 28-degree weather. He could handle that. That's when he noticed the man. He was sitting at the far end of the bench. An older man, black, thin in a way that suggested meals weren't regular. His hair was gray and patchy, cut unevenly, like he'd done it himself without a mirror. He wore a hoodie dark blue with a tear at the left elbow that showed skin underneath. No jacket, no gloves, no scarf. His shoes were canvas, the kind that soak through in rain, and one of them had a hole near the toe where the rubber had separated from the fabric. He was holding a plastic bag. Small, wrinkled. Inside it, a few aluminum cans and empty bottles. The kind people collect off the street and trade in for 5 cents each. His hands shook so badly the bag slipped from his grip. It hit the ground. 2 cans rolled across the sidewalk, slow and loud in the quiet of the evening. The man reached down to pick them up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His fingers fumbled. His arms trembled. He managed to grab 1 can, but couldn't close his hand tight enough to hold it. Nobody helped. A woman in a puffy coat shifted 3 steps to the left without looking at him. A teenager with wireless earbuds turned his back and scrolled through his phone. A man in a business suit stared at the digital arrival board like it contained the meaning of life. Darnell watched all of this. He watched the way people rearranged themselves around the old man, the way water flows around a rock. Not with cruelty exactly, just with the practiced invisibility of a city that had learned not to see certain people. The man's hands. Darnell noticed something about them, but didn't think about it consciously. A scar long and raised running across the back of his right hand, from knuckle to wrist. And his fingers, even while shaking, they tapped against his knee in a rhythm. A specific pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow ones. Over and over, like a song only he could hear. It meant nothing to Darnell. Not yet. The man wasn't asking for help, wasn't holding a sign, wasn't speaking to anyone. He was just sitting there trying not to fall apart in public. His jaw was clenched. His breath came in short, visible bursts that dissolved into the cold air before they got more than 6 inches from his face. Darnell's grandmother's voice played in his head like a recording. Keep that jacket on. Don't you take it off for any reason. But there was another voice too. Older, deeper, the one that lived underneath all the specific instructions. The one that had taught him to carry an old woman's groceries up 3 flights of stairs without being asked. The one that made him give up his seat on the bus for pregnant women even when his legs were tired from basketball practice. The one that Pearline had spent 14 years building into him piece by piece without ever calling it a lesson. Every voice in his head said, walk away, get on the bus, keep the jacket. But there was one voice louder than all of them, and it sounded exactly like his grandmother's. Not the one who told him to keep the jacket on, but the one who'd raised him to notice people nobody else could see. Darnell unzipped his jacket. The cold hit his chest like a wall. Immediate, total. It cut through his hoodie, through his t-shirt, straight to the skin. His body tightened. Every muscle clenched at once, an involuntary reflex against the sudden bite of 28-degree air. He pulled the jacket off his shoulders, held it out. "Here, take this." The old man looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and deep-set, surrounded by skin that had been weathered by years of outdoor exposure. He stared at the jacket, then at Darnell, like he was trying to solve a problem he didn't understand. "Son, I can't take your coat. You need it more than I do, sir. But you'll freeze out here. I'm young. I can run home. You can't." The man's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the jacket again. Darnell pushed it closer. "Please, take it." The man took the jacket with both hands. Slowly, like it was something fragile, he put it on. It was tight across his shoulders. The sleeves stopped just above his wrists. It was a 14-year-old's jacket on a grown man's frame. It didn't fit right, but he pulled it close anyway, wrapped his arms around himself, and closed his eyes. He didn't sob. His face barely moved. But 2 lines of water ran down his cheeks and into the collar of the jacket like they'd been waiting years to fall. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice cracked on the second word. "You're welcome." They stood in silence for a moment. Then the man opened his eyes. "What's your name, son, Darnell?" Something happened in the old man's face. A flicker. A micro-movement around the eyes that lasted less than a second. His lips parted slightly. His fingers, the ones that had been tapping that rhythm, went still. Then it passed. Whatever it was, gone as fast as it came. The bus arrived. Darnell picked up his pharmacy bag and stepped toward the door. "Stay warm," he said over his shoulder. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, watching the boy climb onto the bus. Watching through the window as the bus pulled away from the curb. Watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner on Halsted. He looked down at the jacket, at the zipper that stuck halfway, at the faded charcoal fabric. Then he reached inside the collar near the tag and ran his thumb over 2 letters written in black marker. D. Price. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold this time. Because the last time he'd written that name, it was on a birth certificate in a hospital room on the South Side 14 years and 3 months ago. He didn't know the boy's last name. He didn't need to. Because somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he'd buried under 12 years of regret and cheap whiskey, something had already recognized what his mind refused to believe. Darnell rode the bus home without a jacket. He sat by the window and pressed his hands between his knees to keep them from shaking. The heater on the bus worked, but barely. Warm air drifted from the vents in waves, enough to keep the windows from fogging, but not enough to stop him from shivering. His hoodie was thin, gray, the kind you get in a 3-pack from the clearance rack at Target. It wasn't built for November. His arms had goosebumps, so thick they hurt. The ride took 14 minutes. By the time he stepped off at his stop, his nose was running and his ears burned red from the wind. The walk from the bus stop to his building was 4 blocks. He ran most of it. Not because he wanted to. Because if he stopped moving, the cold would settle into his bones and stay there. He made it to the front door of the building, climbed the stairs, turned the key. Pierline was standing by the window. She always stood by the window when he was out past dark. Always. It was the one thing about her that never changed, no matter how bad her legs hurt or how swollen her ankles got. She would stand at that window and watch the street until she saw him coming. She saw his face first, then his arms, then the absence of what should have been around his shoulders. Darnell Price. "Where is your jacket? I gave it away." Her eyes went wide. "You gave? To who?" "An old man at the bus stop. He was sitting out there in a hoodie. No coat, no gloves, nothing. He was freezing, Grandma. He couldn't even hold onto his bag." Pierline's mouth opened, then closed. She stared at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Something old. Something she hadn't thought about in a long time, or maybe something she thought about every night but never said out loud. She pulled him inside, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, put the kettle on for ginger tea, rubbed his hands between hers until the color started coming back. "You're going to catch your death," she muttered. "Giving away your only coat in November. What were you thinking?" He was cold, Grandma. He didn't have anything. Pearline stopped rubbing his hands. She went still, completely still, like someone had pressed pause on her. Then she turned away, walked to the counter, picked up the kettle, even though the water wasn't boiling yet, and Darnell saw it, just for a second. She pressed the back of her wrist against her eye, quick, like she was wiping away something that had no business being there. "Lord," she said quietly, so quietly he almost missed it. "He's just like him." Like who? She put the kettle back down. Her back was still turned. "Nobody. Go eat. There's rice and beans on the stove." That night, Darnell lay in bed under 2 blankets and a quilt, shivering despite all of it. His forehead was warm. Not dangerously warm, but enough that Pearline checked it twice with the old mercury thermometer she kept in the bathroom drawer, the one you had to shake for 10 seconds before it would register. She heated up a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, poured it into the same mug she'd used since he was small, the one with the chipped handle and the faded rooster on the side. She sat on the edge of his bed and watched him drink it. "You did a good thing," she said finally. "A stupid thing, but a good thing. In that apartment, in that neighborhood, on that particular November night, over 6,800 people in the city of Chicago had no place to sleep indoors. Hypothermia was the leading weather-related cause of death for people on the street. Darnell didn't know those numbers. He just knew what cold looked like on a man who had nowhere to go. He fell asleep around 9:30. Pearline sat with him until his breathing evened out. Then she stood. Slowly, her knees popping like they always did, she walked to her bedroom, to the nightstand, opened the top drawer. Inside, beneath a Bible and a pair of reading glasses and a bottle of hand lotion, there was an envelope, yellow with age. The corners soft from years of handling. She took it out, sat on the edge of her bed, opened it. Inside was a photograph. A young man, maybe 25, holding a baby in a hospital room. The man was smiling. The baby was wrapped in a blue blanket with its eyes closed. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that wasn't hers, it said Raymond and Darnell, Day 1. Behind the photograph was a letter, folded twice. She didn't unfold it tonight. She just held the photo and looked at the young man's face. She hadn't looked at that photo in 4 years. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she needed to see his face again. That night, while a 14-year-old boy slept off a fever in Englewood, the man who'd received his jacket was sitting under the Eisenhower overpass near Garfield Park. He sat on a piece of flattened cardboard with his back against a concrete pillar, surrounded by 6 other people who had nowhere else to go. A woman wrapped in a sleeping bag, 2 men sharing a bottle in a brown paper sack, a younger guy, maybe 25, talking quietly to himself. Raymond Price pulled the jacket tighter around his chest. It was the warmest thing he'd worn in 3 years. The zipper stuck halfway, so he held the front closed with both hands. The fabric smelled like fabric softener and something else. Something he couldn't name. Something that made his throat tighten every time he breathed in. He hadn't always lived like this. Raymond Price enlisted in the United States Army in 2004. He was 23. Strong. Focused. The kind of young man who believed that service meant something. He deployed to Afghanistan in 2005 and served 3 tours over the next 3 years. He saw things there that don't belong in sentences. Things that stayed behind his eyelids when he closed them at night. Things that made ordinary sounds, a car backfiring, a door slamming, a child screaming, feel like incoming fire. He came home in 2008. Technically, he came home. His body came back. The rest of him was still somewhere in Kandahar, crouched behind a wall waiting for the next explosion. They didn't call it PTSD back then. Not in his neighborhood. Not in his family. They called it being different. They said he'd come back wrong. His mother told him to pray. His brother told him to man up. His friends from before the deployment stopped calling after the second time he flinched at a birthday balloon popping and knocked over a table full of food. He met Shanice in 2009. She was the first person who didn't treat him like something broken. They got married, had a baby. Darnell, for a while it almost worked. Raymond got a job at a warehouse on the west side. Shanice worked part-time at a daycare. They had the apartment in Englewood, the same one Pearline still lived in. Raymond built a crib with his own hands, sanded every edge so the baby couldn't get a splinter, painted it blue. But the nights were bad. He couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. The dreams were worse than the sleeplessness. He'd wake up swinging, shouting orders in a language Shanice didn't understand because it was the language of a place he'd never fully left. Shanice begged him to see someone, a counselor, a doctor, anyone. He wouldn't go. In the community Raymond grew up in, asking for help with your mind was the same as admitting you were weak. Black men didn't go to therapy. Black men handled it. That's what his father had told him. That's what every man he'd ever respected had modeled. You don't break down, you don't talk about it, you push through. So he pushed through. And the pushing broke him in different ways. He started drinking, not socially, medicinally. Whiskey to sleep, whiskey to stop the shaking, whiskey to quiet the sounds that weren't there. Then came the night that ended everything. Darnell was 14 months old. Raymond woke up at 2 a.m. in the grip of a panic attack so severe he couldn't tell where he was. He was back in the convoy, back in the dust. His hands were looking for his weapon. He swung his arm hard and hit the edge of the crib. The crib rocked. The baby woke up screaming. Shanice ran in and grabbed Darnell. She looked at Raymond with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Fear. Not of the dark, not of a noise, of him. That was the night Raymond decided to leave, not because he didn't love his son, because he did. Because he loved him enough to recognize that the most dangerous person in that apartment was the one who was supposed to protect everyone in it. He packed a bag. He wrote a letter. He left it on the kitchen counter next to a bottle of formula and $40 in cash. Then he walked out the door at 3:17 in the morning and didn't come back. On any given night in America, roughly 35,000 military veterans sleep on the street. The rate of untreated PTSD among black veterans is 1.5 times the national average. Raymond didn't know these numbers. He just lived them. 12 years passed. He lost the warehouse job within 6 months of leaving, lost his apartment after that, cycled through shelters, halfway houses, park benches, overpasses. The drinking got worse. Then it got normal. Then it became the only thing he was consistent at. He thought about Darnell every single day. He just never did anything about it, because every year that passed made the distance wider and the shame deeper and the excuse easier to believe. He's better off without me. That was the lie he told himself every morning. Some mornings he almost believed it. Now he sat under an overpass in November, wearing a 14-year-old's jacket. He ran his thumb along the inside of the collar for the 3rd time. The letters were small, written in black marker in a grandmother's careful handwriting. D. Price. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from the cold this time. Because the last time he'd written that name, it was on a birth certificate in a hospital room on the South Side 14 years and 3 months ago. 3 days later, Raymond walked to the bus stop on Halsted Street. He got there at 4:45 in the afternoon and sat on the bench. The same bench. The same spot. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. That's not true. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He just wasn't ready to admit it out loud, because admitting it would mean the name on the jacket wasn't a coincidence. And if it wasn't a coincidence, then the boy who gave him the only warm thing he owned was the same boy he'd walked away from 12 years ago. Darnell didn't show up that day, or the next. On the 5th day, Raymond came back again. He sat on the far end of the bench, partially hidden behind the shelter wall. He wore the jacket. He always wore the jacket now. At 5:12, the number 8 bus pulled up. The doors opened, and there he was. Darnell stepped off the bus in the same gray hoodie. No jacket. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and his shoulders were hunched against the wind. He walked to the other side of the shelter and stood near the pole waiting for a transfer. Raymond watched him from 15 feet away. He watched the way Darnell shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He watched the way the boy's fingers tapped against the metal pole. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow ones, the exact same pattern. Raymond looked down at his own hand. His fingers were doing the same thing against his knee. He hadn't noticed until now. He'd never noticed. It was just something his hands did, something they'd always done. He wanted to walk over. He wanted to say something. Anything. But then he caught his own reflection in the shelter glass. The gray stubble, the hollowed cheeks, the clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, the eyes of a man who'd spent 12 years running from himself. What was he supposed to say? I'm your father like this, smelling like this, looking like this. Darnell saw him first. The boy's face changed, not with fear, with recognition, the easy kind. Hey, you still wearing the jacket? Raymond managed to nod. Still wearing it. Warmest thing I own. Darnell walked over. Casual, like visiting an old neighbor. Good. It's cold out here. You doing okay? I'm managing. They stood together in the quiet. The wind pushed between them. Darnell blew into his hands. You go to school around here? Raymond asked. The question came out before he could stop it. Robeson, 9th grade, 9th grade. Raymond did the math in his head. 14 years old. The right age. The exact right age. You live nearby Englewood. With my grandma. Raymond's chest compressed. Englewood. With his grandma. Not with his mother. Not with his father. With his grandma. She doing all right? Your grandma. She's got diabetes. Type 2. Some days are better than others. I pick up her medicine every Thursday. Every Thursday. Same route, same bus, same stop. Raymond kept his voice level. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age. Darnell shrugged. She took care of me my whole life. Least I can do. The bus came. Darnell's bus. He picked up his pharmacy bag and stepped toward the door, then turned back. My grandma says, I'm just like my dad. I don't even know what that means. Never met him. Raymond swallowed, his jaw locked. His eyes burned, but nothing fell. The bus doors closed. Darnell disappeared behind tinted glass. He could have said it right then. 3 words. I'm your father. But he looked at his own hands, cracked, dirty, trembling, and decided his son deserved a better reveal than a confession from a man who smelled like bus shelters and broken promises. The weeks that followed had a rhythm. Not a plan. A rhythm. The kind that develops when 2 people keep showing up to the same place at the same time without ever agreeing to. Monday. Darnell brought him half a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a napkin. He handed it over, the way you'd hand someone a newspaper. Casual, like it was nothing. But Raymond noticed the sandwich was cut diagonally. The way you cut a sandwich for someone you actually thought about. Wednesday. A thermos of soup. Still hot. Chicken and rice. The kind made from scratch, not from a can. Darnell said his grandma made too much. Raymond knew that wasn't true. Nobody makes too much soup by accident. You make too much soup on purpose, when you know someone else needs it. Friday. Raymond pulled out a piece of cardboard he'd been working on all week. He'd drawn a chessboard on it with a borrowed pen. The pieces were bottle caps, some marked with a cross, some with a circle. He set it on the bench between them. You know how to play? Darnell looked at the board. No. I'll teach you. It's a good game. Teaches you to think before you move. They played for 20 minutes. Darnell lost badly and laughed about it. Raymond hadn't heard that laugh before. It hit him somewhere behind the ribs. Because it sounded exactly like Shanice's laugh. The same pitch. The same way it started quiet and got louder. The same way it made everyone around it feel like the world was slightly less broken. Raymond turned his face away, pretended to study the board, but really he was just trying not to fall apart in front of a boy who didn't know why a stranger's eyes kept watering in the cold. Chess, as it happens, has been used in recovery programs for veterans with PTSD for decades. The focus it requires, the pattern recognition, the discipline of thinking 3 moves ahead instead of reacting to what's right in front of you. Raymond had learned the game at Fort Bragg from a sergeant who said it was the only legal way to fight somebody without anybody getting hurt. He never forgot it, even when he forgot most other things worth remembering. Pearline noticed the food going missing. She didn't say anything the first week or the second, but on the 3rd Thursday when Darnell wrapped up half the leftover cornbread in aluminum foil and slipped it into his backpack, she spoke from the kitchen doorway. You feeding that man again? He needs it more. Grandma. She stood there for a long moment, something working behind her eyes. This was the second time she'd gone quiet like that. The second time a mention of this man at the bus stop made her face do something complicated and private. She turned back to the stove. Just be careful. Raymond called Darnell, young man, never son. He was careful about that. He measured the word before it came out each time and redirected it. Young man, kid, brother. Anything but the one word that would crack everything open. But the silence had weight. Every day he didn't say it, the not saying got heavier. There's a difference between lying to someone and staying silent. Lying is active. You build something false. Silence is passive. You just let the truth sit in a room and refuse to introduce it. But the result is the same. Someone trusts you based on incomplete information. And every day that trust grows, the eventual correction gets more expensive. If you've ever formed a connection with someone without knowing the full story, if you've ever cared about a stranger who felt strangely familiar, hit subscribe. Because what happens when the truth finally comes out will test everything you think you know about forgiveness. For 3 weeks, things were good. Darnell had someone to talk to. Raymond had someone to exist for. The bus stop on Halsted became their meeting place, their ritual, their quiet little agreement that neither of them had to name. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, the temperature dropped to 19 degrees, and everything good about their routine shattered in under 60 seconds. Darnell was standing at the bus stop. Same spot, same hoodie, his pharmacy bag in his left hand. Paraline's insulin, $47. The same vial he picked up every Thursday. But this week, she'd needed it 2 days early because her blood sugar had spiked over the weekend. 3 boys from the high school appeared from the direction of Halsted and 63rd. Older, bigger, juniors, maybe seniors. They walked with the specific energy of people looking for entertainment at someone else's expense. The tallest one noticed Darnell first. "Yo, where's your jacket, man? You too broke for a coat?" Darnell didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the street, watching for the bus. "I'm talking to you, hoodie boy. You hear me." The second one circled around, looked at the pharmacy bag. "What's in the bag?" "That your lunch?" "It's nothing." "Let me see." The tall one grabbed the bag. Darnell held on. For a second they stood there, locked, 2 people pulling in opposite directions. Then the third boy shoved Darnell from behind. Hard. His grip broke. He hit the concrete on his side, his elbow taking the impact. The bag ripped. The pharmacy box skidded across the wet sidewalk. In schools located in neighborhoods below the federal poverty line, bullying rates run nearly 40% higher than the national average. When you can't afford the things other kids take for granted, a jacket, a phone, a pair of shoes that match, you become a target. Not because you did anything wrong, but because poverty is visible and cruelty looks for what's visible. Darnell scrambled for the box. The tall boy stepped on it, not to break it, just to make a point. Just to watch someone smaller reach for something they couldn't get. Raymond was 30 feet away, sitting behind the shelter wall. He'd been waiting for Darnell, same as every afternoon. He heard the voices first, then the sound of someone hitting pavement. He stood up, slowly, the way he used to stand in situations where standing slowly was more dangerous than standing fast. His knees popped, his back protested, but his shoulders squared on instinct. An old reflex from a body that remembered how to command attention even when everything else about it had fallen apart. He walked toward the 3 boys, didn't run, didn't shout, just walked. Steady, controlled. Each step deliberate. He stopped 5 feet from the tall one and said 2 words. "That's enough." His voice was low, flat, not angry, not pleading. It was the voice of a man who had once told 20 soldiers to hold a position under fire and watch them do it without question. The tone hadn't left him. 12 years on the street hadn't taken that away. The tall boy looked at Raymond, at the torn clothes, the weathered face, the eyes that didn't blink. Something in those eyes made the tall boy lift his foot off the pharmacy box. He looked at his friends. They looked at each other. They left. No words, no threats, They just walked away faster than they'd arrived. Darnell got up from the ground. His elbow was scraped. His hands were shaking. He picked up the pharmacy box and checked the vial inside. Unbroken, Raymond stood next to him, close enough to matter, not close enough to crowd. "You hurt." "No, I'm okay." "Your grandmother's medication." Darnell looked at him. "How did you know it's for my grandmother?" "Because boys your age don't buy their own medicine." Darnell almost smiled. Almost. But his hands were still trembling, and his elbow was starting to sting where the skin had torn, and the adrenaline was fading into something heavier. Something that felt a lot like realizing you're alone in the world, and 14 years old, and nobody is coming to help. Except someone had. A stranger. An old man in a too-small jacket who smelled like the city and moved like a soldier. "Thank you," Darnell said. His voice was smaller than usual. "I wish I had someone like you around more often." Raymond didn't answer. He stood there with his hands at his sides, looking at his son, feeling the full weight of every day he'd missed pressing down on his chest like a boot. He wanted to say, "You do. I'm right here. I've always been right here. Just too broken to show up." It happened on a Wednesday. The kind of Wednesday that starts ordinary and ends with your whole life rearranged. Darnell came home from school to find Pierline on the kitchen floor. She was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were open, unfocused, staring at the ceiling like she was trying to read something written on it. Her blood sugar had crashed. The insulin dose from that morning had been too strong, or the food she'd eaten hadn't been enough, or both. Her skin was gray. Her hands were cold. The mug with the chipped handle and the faded rooster was broken on the floor next to her. Tea pooling around the ceramic pieces. Darnell called 911. His voice shook so badly the dispatcher asked him to repeat the address twice. The ambulance took 11 minutes. They loaded Pierline onto a stretcher, while Darnell stood in the doorway holding her purse because he didn't know what else to hold on to. They took her to Stroger Hospital. Darnell rode in the back of the ambulance. A paramedic asked him questions he couldn't answer. Does she take any other medications? Is she allergic to anything? Is there a parent or guardian we can contact? No, there's nobody. It's just us. At the hospital, they wheeled Pierline through double doors that Darnell wasn't allowed to pass. A nurse told him to sit in the waiting area. Someone would come talk to him. He sat. He waited. His leg bounced. His hands opened and closed. An hour passed. Nobody came. He thought about calling someone. But the list of people he could call was short. Mrs. Doris didn't have a phone. His school counselor wouldn't answer at 7 in the evening. He scrolled through his contacts and realized there were 14 names in his phone, and not one of them could help him right now. Then he thought of the bus stop. He thought of Raymond. He didn't think about why. He just knew that in the entire city of Chicago, the one person who'd shown up for him without being asked was an old man who didn't even have a last name as far as Darnell knew. So he ran, out the emergency room doors, down Harrison Street, 4 blocks to the nearest CTA stop. He caught the bus to Halstead, sat in the back, prayed Raymond would be there. He was. Same bench, same jacket, Darnell's jacket. Raymond saw the boy's face and stood up immediately. "What happened?" "My grandma. She collapsed. She's at Stroger. I don't know what's wrong." "They won't tell me anything because I'm 14, and I'm not. His voice broke. Not dramatically. Just cracked down the middle, like a glass somebody set down too hard. Raymond didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $2. His last $2, every cent he had. He walked to the bus stop and waited with Darnell for the eastbound line. They rode together in silence. Raymond didn't put his arm around the boy. Didn't offer false comfort. Just sat next to him. Close enough to matter. At Stroger, the security guard looked at Raymond the way security guards look at men who haven't showered in weeks. Raymond stopped at the entrance. "You go in. I'll wait out here. It's cold. I've had worse." Darnell went inside. The nurse at the station told him his grandmother was stable, resting. He could go in. Pierline was awake. Barely. An IV in her arm. A monitor beeping her heart rate in steady intervals. Her eyes found Darnell and something in them softened. "Baby, you scared me. I scared you, Grandma. You were on the floor. She almost smiled. Who brought you here? A friend. The old man I told you about. From the bus stop. He's outside. Pearline was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Darnell didn't expect. Bring him in. I want to meet him. Darnell walked back through the double doors and out to the entrance where Raymond sat on a concrete bench, his hands tucked under his arms for warmth. She wants to meet you. Raymond's face changed. Something flashed across it. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to the expression of a man standing at the edge of a cliff looking down, trying to decide. He followed Darnell inside, past the security guard who watched but didn't stop them. Down the hallway, through the door of room 214. Pearline was propped up on the hospital bed. The monitor beeped. A nurse's shoes squeaked somewhere down the corridor. The fluorescent light hummed the way fluorescent lights always do, indifferent to everything happening beneath them. Raymond stepped into the room. He stood just inside the doorway. His hands were at his sides. He didn't speak. Pearline looked at him. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. The monitor still beeped. The light still hummed. But the silence between the two adults filled every corner of that room like water rising in a locked space. 5 seconds. 10. Pearline's eyes moved across his face. Slowly. The way you read a sentence you've read 1,000 times but suddenly see differently. She looked at his jaw, his hands, the scar across his right knuckle. Then she said one word. Raymond. Darnell's head turned. He looked at his grandmother, then at Raymond, then back at his grandmother. You know him. Pearline's eyes were wet. She looked at Raymond, then at Darnell, then at Raymond again. Her chin trembled, but her voice held steady. The steadiness of a woman who had carried a secret for 12 years and was finally setting it down. Baby. She reached for Darnell's hand. This man, this is your father. The room didn't explode. Nobody screamed. Nobody collapsed. What happened was quieter and worse. Darnell's entire body went still. Not relaxed still. Frozen still. The kind of still that happens when your brain receives information it cannot process, so it simply stops everything and waits. He looked at Raymond. He studied the man's face the way you'd study a stranger's. The gray stubble. The hollow cheeks. The eyes that were now producing tears in 2 steady lines, the same way they had the night he'd received the jacket. But these tears were different. These weren't grateful. These were ashamed. Raymond didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't reach out. He stood in that doorway like a man awaiting sentencing, because that's exactly what he was doing. Pearline was the calmest person in the room, she had suspected. Maybe not from the first time Darnell mentioned the man at the bus stop, but from the second. From the moment Darnell described the finger tapping. From the moment he said the man called him young man and wouldn't take the jacket and cried without making a sound. She'd known those details the way you know your own handwriting, because she'd watched Raymond do all of those things 14 years ago. Darnell pulled his hand away from Pearline's. Slowly. He took one step back, then another. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was flat, controlled. The voice of a boy who'd practiced not needing a father for so long that hearing he had one felt like being told the sky was a different color than the one he'd been staring at his whole life. You left. You left and you never came back. Then he walked out of the room. The jacket he'd given a stranger 3 weeks ago suddenly felt like the cruelest joke the universe had ever played on him. Darnell sat in the hallway on a plastic chair bolted to the wall. His head was down. His fists were closed so tight, his fingernails dug into his palms and left marks he wouldn't notice until later. Raymond came out of the room. He stopped 10 steps away, close enough to see, far enough to respect what the distance meant. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The hallway traffic moved around them. A nurse pushed a cart. An orderly mopped a section of floor. A woman walked by crying into her phone. The hospital didn't care about their silence. It had its own emergencies. Darnell spoke first, without looking up. 14 years. You were alive this whole time, and you were. What, picking cans off the street, sleeping under bridges, while I was eating school lunch for dinner because Grandma couldn't afford groceries. Raymond's voice was low, stripped of everything except honesty. I know. You know. That's it. You know. Yes. Darnell looked up. His eyes were dry but burning. "I gave you my jacket. My only jacket. I walked home in 24-degree weather because I felt sorry for you. Because I thought you were just some old man who had nobody. And you're my father. You were my father the whole time. I didn't know it was you. Not at first." When did you know? The name inside the collar. D. Price. And then your smile. You have your mother's smile. Darnell flinched like he'd been hit. Don't talk about her. You don't get to talk about her." Raymond closed his mouth. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't offer a single word in his own defense. Because there was nothing to defend. He'd left. That was the fact. Every reason behind it, every justification, every 3 a.m. terror that had driven him out the door, none of it erased the central truth. He had a son, and he'd chosen to leave him. Darnell's breathing changed. It got shorter, faster. His shoulders started to shake. And then it happened. The crying. Not the quiet kind, not the graceful kind you see in movies where a single tear rolls down a cheekbone. This was the kind of crying that bends you in half. The kind that comes from a place so deep, it doesn't even know how to make sound at first. It just wrenches your body and waits for the noise to catch up. Darnell cried like a boy who'd been holding it together since he was 3 years old and had just been given permission to stop. Raymond watched. His own eyes were streaming. He wanted to walk over. Every muscle in his body wanted to close those 10 steps and put his arms around his son, but he didn't. He lowered himself to the floor instead, sat with his back against the hallway wall, 10 steps away, and cried there, alone, 2 people, 10 steps apart, both broken, neither reaching for the other. Darnell wiped his face with the back of his hand. He stood up. His eyes were swollen. His voice came out rough. "Don't follow me." He walked toward the elevator. Didn't look back. Raymond stayed on the floor, his back against the wall, his knees pulled up, the jacket, the boy's jacket, still on his shoulders. He pressed his face into the collar and breathed in the fading scent of fabric softener, the last physical trace of a son who'd just told him to stay away. Most stories would tell you this is where the father chased after his son. But Raymond had spent 12 years learning that love isn't about what you want. It's about what the other person needs. And right now his son needed space. Darnell came back to Perline's room an hour later. His eyes were puffy. His voice was flat. Raymond was gone. Perline watched him sit down. She waited. She'd been waiting for this conversation for 12 years. She knew better than to rush it. "You knew," Darnell said. "You knew the whole time, I suspected. When you described him, the tapping, the way he wouldn't accept help, the way he cried without sound. I knew those things because I watched your father do them every day for 2 years before he left. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure. And because if I was wrong, I would have broken your heart for nothing." Darnell stared at the floor. "And if you were right, then I needed you to see him first. As a person, not as the man who left you." He looked up at her. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the envelope. The yellow one, the one she'd been carrying for years, the one she'd opened and closed hundreds of times in the dark of her bedroom after he'd fallen asleep. She held it out to him. "Your father left this the night he walked out. He gave it to me. Asked me to give it to you when you were old enough. I've been trying to decide when that was ever since." Darnell took the envelope. Inside was the photograph he'd never seen. Raymond, at 25, holding a baby in a blue blanket, smiling, strong, clean. The man in the photo looked nothing like the man at the bus stop. 12 years, and addiction, and homelessness had rewritten every feature except the eyes. Those were the same. Behind the photograph was a letter. Darnell unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky even back then. He read quietly. Perline watched his face. The letter said what Raymond couldn't say in person, that he was hearing things that weren't there, that he'd woken from a nightmare and swung at shadows and hit the crib, that the baby had screamed and he'd realized in that moment he was the most dangerous thing in his own home. "I'm leaving," Because staying is more dangerous than going, Raymond had written. He won't remember me. That's better than remembering a father who scared him. The rest of the letter Caroline summarized. He'd begged her to keep Darnell safe. He'd promised to get help. He'd said he would come back when he was better. He never came back because he never got better. Not because he stopped trying, because the system kept failing him, because the VA had a waiting list 8 months long, because by the time he got to the front of the line, he'd lost the apartment and the phone number and the will to dial it. He called me once, Caroline said quietly, when you were about 3 in the morning, crying, saying he wanted to come home. I told him to get help first. That was the last time I heard his voice. Until today. Darnell stared at the photograph, the young man smiling in it, the baby in his arms. Caroline spoke carefully. Back then, we didn't call it PTSD. We called it, he came back different. And we didn't help. We waited for them to fix themselves. She paused. I was angry at your father for a long time. Part of me still is. But you know what made me stop being only angry? You. When you gave that man your jacket and came home shivering and told me you did it because he needed it more. That's what your father used to do. He used to give away the last thing he had. Every time. It was the most beautiful and the most destructive thing about him. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't stop it from hurting, but it gives you a choice about what to do with the pain. Darnell looked at the photo for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Not because he'd forgiven his father, but because for the first time in his life, he had a face to attach to the hole that had always been there. Raymond didn't go back to the overpass that night. He went somewhere he hadn't gone in years. Pacific Garden Mission on South Canal Street, the oldest continuously operating rescue mission in the country. He'd been there before. Years ago. Twice. Both times he'd stayed 3 nights and left because the structure felt like confinement and the sobriety felt like suffocation. This time was different, not because he was different yet, but because the reason was, he walked in at 9:47 p.m. A man at the intake desk handed him a clipboard with 12 pages of forms: name, date of birth, military service history, substance use, mental health, emergency contact. He left that last line blank. He waited 4 hours to see a counselor. A young woman, maybe 28, half his age. She sat across from him in a small office with motivational posters on the wall and a box of tissues on the desk. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said, "How hopeless do you feel right now?" Raymond thought about it. 3 weeks ago, I would have said 10, and now, maybe a 7. Something changed. She waited. I found my son. Or he found me. I'm not sure which. But either way, I can't meet him again looking like this, smelling like this, being this. She wrote something down. The VA's Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program had a 47% success rate for sustained housing after 12 months. Better than nothing. Worse than enough. Raymond didn't know those numbers. He just knew he was filling out forms at 10 o'clock at night because a 14-year-old boy had once given him a jacket, and that boy turned out to be the only reason he still had to keep breathing. They assigned him a bed, a locker, a schedule, group therapy at 8, individual at 2, chores in between, no alcohol, no excuses. No leaving the building for the first 72 hours. The next morning, Raymond did something he hadn't done in years. He washed the jacket, Darnell's jacket, by hand. In the shelter bathroom sink with a bar of soap, he scrubbed the collar where the name was written, careful not to smudge the marker. D. Price. He hung it over the radiator to dry. Then, he started leaving things. Day 1. A scarf. Not new. He'd found it in the shelter's donation bin. Gray wool, slightly pilled, but clean. He folded it and left it on the bench at the Halstead bus stop at 4:30 in the afternoon before Darnell would arrive. Weighted it down with a can so the wind wouldn't take it. Day 3. A chess piece. A knight. He'd carved it from a block of scrap wood using a small knife borrowed from the shelter's maintenance closet. It took him 6 hours. His hands shook the whole time. The finish was rough. The shape was imperfect, but it was recognizable. And it was made by hand, by his hands. Day 5. A piece of paper folded twice, tucked under the night's base. 5 sentences in his shaky handwriting. I'm getting help. Not because you asked. Because you deserve a father, not an excuse. I'm at Pacific Garden. I'm not running this time. Darnell found the scarf on Thursday. Looked at it. Left it on the bench. Walked away. He found the chess piece the following Monday. Picked it up. Turned it over in his fingers. Recognized the carving style. Rough. Patient. The same hands that had drawn a chessboard on cardboard. He put it in his pocket without thinking about why. He found the note on Wednesday. Read it standing at the bus stop with his hoodie pulled tight against the wind. Read it again on the bus. Read it a third time at the kitchen table while Pearline watched from the stove and said nothing. I'm getting help. Not because you asked. Because you deserve a father, not an excuse. He folded the note and put it in his pocket next to the night and the photograph. This isn't the part where everything gets fixed. If you're waiting for a hug and a montage, that's not how real families work. What happens next is slower, messier, and more honest than that. 2 weeks passed. Pearline came home from the hospital. Her blood sugar stabilized. She moved slower, now held the walls when she walked, but she was alive and she was home, and that was enough. Darnell didn't talk about Raymond. Not once. Pearline didn't push. She made meals. She watched television. She waited the way grandmothers wait, with a patience that looks like doing nothing but is actually doing everything. On a Saturday morning in late December, Darnell put on his hoodie and told Pearline he was going out. Where to? He didn't answer right away. He stood in the doorway with his hand on the knob looking at the floor. I need to find him. Pearline nodded once. She didn't ask who. She didn't say be careful or don't go or are you sure? She just nodded. Because she'd been waiting for this too. Darnell took the bus to Halstead. The bus stop was empty. Raymond wasn't there. He hadn't been there in weeks. Darnell asked a woman sitting near the shelter if she'd seen an older man, thin gray hair, usually wearing a charcoal jacket that was too small for him. She shook her head. But a man collecting bottles nearby overheard. You talking about Ray? He's at Pacific Garden, down on Canal. Been there a while now. Darnell took 2 more buses. 40 minutes across the city. He walked into the Mission at 11:15 in the morning and told the man at the front desk he was looking for Raymond Price. They made him wait in a room with plastic chairs and a vending machine that only had water. 15 minutes later, a staff member walked him through a side door to a small courtyard behind the building. Raymond was there. Sweeping. He wore work gloves and a reflective vest over Darnell's jacket. The jacket that still didn't fit right. The jacket he still hadn't taken off. He looked different. Not transformed, not reborn, just cleaner. His hair was cut short and even. His face had been shaved recently. His eyes were the same, tired and deep, but something behind them had shifted, like a window that had been painted shut for years, and somebody had finally cracked it open an inch. He saw Darnell and stopped sweeping. The broom stayed in his hands. He didn't put it down, didn't step forward. Just stood there the way you stand when you're not sure if the person in front of you is going to stay or turn around. Darnell walked toward him. Stopped about 6 feet away. Close enough to talk. Far enough to leave. I read your letter, the one you left when I was a baby. Raymond's grip tightened on the broom handle. Your grandmother kept it. She kept everything. The courtyard was quiet. A pigeon landed on the fence and left again. Wind pushed an empty chip bag across the concrete. Did you ever try to come back? Raymond set the broom against the wall. Slowly, like he needed his hands free for what came next. Twice. Once when you were 5. I took the bus to Englewood, stood outside the building for 2 hours. I could see your apartment from the street, 3rd window from the left. You were sitting on the couch watching something on TV. Cartoons, I think. You were laughing. Your whole body was laughing the way kids do when they don't know anybody's watching. And I stood down there on the sidewalk thinking he looks happy. He looks like he's okay. Maybe I just messed that up. Darnell was quiet for a moment. You would have. Probably. I know. The second time. Last year. But the building was gone. They'd torn it down. New construction. Condos, I think. I walked around the block 3 times trying to figure out where you'd moved. Asked a couple people. Nobody knew. Or nobody wanted to tell a man who looked like me. If you've ever had to decide whether to let someone back into your life after they hurt you, whether to protect yourself or give them another chance, make sure you're subscribed. Because the choice Darnell makes next is one that most adults still struggle with. Darnell noticed something on the bench next to Raymond's water bottle. A piece of wood, small, half-carved. The shape was coming together. A chess piece. Another knight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the one Raymond had left at the bus stop. The finished one, rough but recognizable. He held it up. "You left this." Raymond looked at it. Then at the one he was carving. His eyes got wet, but nothing fell. "It's a knight. They move in L shapes. Everyone thinks chess pieces go straight, but knights don't. They go sideways first, then forward." Darnell turned the piece over in his fingers. Sideways first, then forward. Yeah. They stood in the courtyard, with the wind and the pigeons, and the silence that wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of things neither of them was ready to say out loud, but that didn't need to be said out loud because they were both standing there, which was its own kind of language. Darnell put the knight back in his pocket. "I'll come back next week. Same time." Raymond nodded. His jaw was tight, his eyes were bright, but he didn't cry. Not this time. This time he just stood there and received it. The small, careful, conditional gift of a second chance from a boy who had every right to walk away and didn't. "Okay," Raymond said. "I'll be here." Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a direction. And for the first time, they were both walking the same way. Week 3. Darnell showed up at the shelter on Saturday morning. They sat in the courtyard and played chess on a real board this time. The shelter had one in the common room. Raymond set up the pieces. Darnell played white. They didn't talk much. The game did the talking. When Raymond took Darnell's bishop, Darnell said lucky, and Raymond almost smiled. When Darnell took Raymond's rook 2 moves later, Raymond said that was good and meant it. They played for 40 minutes. Raymond won. Darnell said next week and left. Week 5. Raymond started the alcohol treatment program. It wasn't gentle. The first 3 days his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a pen. He sweat through his sheets at night. His counselor told him, the body has to grieve what it's losing, even when what it's losing is poison. Darnell came on Saturday. The staff member at the desk hesitated. "He's having a rough day. You might want to come back." Darnell sat down in the plastic chair. "I'll wait." 30 minutes later, Raymond came out. He looked gray. His eyes were glassy. His hands were stuffed in the jacket pockets to hide the trembling. "Not today, son. I'm not good today." It was the first time he'd called him son since the hospital. Neither of them acknowledged it. Darnell didn't argue. He sat in the hallway for an hour, read a chapter of his school book, then left. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. Week 8. Raymond was accepted into the HUD-VASH housing program, a voucher for transitional housing specifically for homeless veterans. He got a room in a supportive housing building on the west side, small. A bed, a desk, a window that faced a parking lot. But it had a door that locked, and a shower that was his, and a silence at night that belonged to him alone instead of being shared with 40 strangers. Week 10. Darnell brought Pierline. They took 2 buses. Darnell held Pierline's arm on the stairs. She moved slowly, but she moved. When they got to Raymond's room, he was standing by the window in a clean shirt, the first clean shirt Darnell had ever seen him wear. He'd shaved. He'd combed his hair. He looked like he'd been standing there for an hour, waiting, trying to figure out what to do with his hands. Pierline stood in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at her. 12 years collapsed into the space between them. "You look terrible," she said. "I know." She looked around the room. At the bed, the desk, the window, the small pile of carved chess pieces on the windowsill. "You better get better. That boy needs you." That was all she said. She didn't hug him. She didn't cry. She didn't forgive him with words. But she'd come. She'd walked through the door. And in a family that communicated as much through presence as through language, walking through the door was enough. Week 14. Raymond got his first paycheck. Maintenance work at the shelter. $820 for 2 weeks. He held the check in both hands in the staff office and stared at it the way a man stares at a glass of water after crossing a desert. Not with celebration, with disbelief that something this ordinary could feel this holy. He cashed the check, paid his portion of rent, bought groceries, put $30 aside for the bus, and with what was left, he went to Walmart. He bought a jacket. Black, size medium, the kind a 15-year-old boy would wear. Not expensive, not fancy. $31.47 after tax. He tried to pick one with a zipper that worked smoothly because he remembered how the old one used to stick. He took the bus to Englewood, walked to the building, climbed the stairs, stood in front of the door to apartment 212. He didn't knock. He set the jacket on the doormat. From his pocket he pulled a scrap of paper. He'd written on it 5 times before getting the words right. The final version said 3 words and a name. Now we're even. Dad. He put the note in the jacket pocket. Then he walked back down the stairs and caught the bus home. Darnell found the jacket 20 minutes later. He opened the door to take the trash out, and there it was. Black, new, folded neatly on the mat with a price tag still attached. He picked it up, felt the weight of it, checked the pockets. He read the note. Read it again. And for the first time since this whole thing started, he smiled because of his father. Not in spite of him, because of him. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a $31 jacket from Walmart with a note written in shaky handwriting, but it carried more weight than any apology ever could, because it said, I see you, I remember, and I'm trying. 1 year later, November again, the same bus stop on Halstead Street, the same cold, the same pale orange streetlights throwing circles on wet concrete, but everything else was different. Darnell Price was 15 now, taller. His voice had dropped half an octave since last winter. He stood at the bus stop in the black jacket Raymond had bought him, his hands in the pockets, his breath making clouds in the freezing air. In his right pocket, his fingers rested on a small wooden chess piece, a knight. He touched it every time he waited for the bus. Not consciously, just habit. The way you touch something that reminds you where you've been and how far you've come. Raymond stood next to him. He wore the old jacket, Darnell's jacket, the one from the Salvation Army that was 2 sizes too small and had a zipper that stuck halfway. He'd never stopped wearing it. The fabric was thinner now. The elbows were nearly worn through. But he kept it the way some people keep a letter or a photograph, not for function, for meaning. 9 months sober. He lived in the supportive housing on the west side. He worked maintenance at the shelter 5 days a week. On Tuesday evenings, he attended a veterans support group at the VA clinic on the near west side, sitting in a circle with 11 other men who were learning to talk about the things they'd carried home from war. He wasn't fixed. He still had nights when the dreams came back and he woke up swinging at shadows. He still flinched at loud noises. He still sometimes looked at a bottle on a shelf and felt the pull in his chest like a rope being tugged from the inside. But he showed up. Every day. For 9 months. And showing up, it turned out, was the only thing that mattered. Cold out here, Darnell said. Yeah. You good, I'm good. I'm good. They stood in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Not heavy, not loaded, the comfortable kind. The kind that happens between 2 people who've said the hard things already and don't need to fill every gap with words. Raymond looked at him. I'm not going to be a perfect father. I don't know how. Never learned. Darnell didn't look away. I don't need perfect. I just need you to show up. I'll show up. Pearline was doing better, not cured. Diabetes doesn't work that way, but better. Raymond picked up her prescriptions now, drove her to appointments in a borrowed car from the shelter, sat in the waiting room and read magazines from 2019 while she got her blood work done. Small things, the things Darnell used to do alone. The bus arrived. They both got on, sat next to each other near the back. The heater worked this time. The windows fogged. Darnell drew a small shape on the glass with his finger, a letter L. The path of a night. Raymond saw it, didn't say anything, just tapped his fingers against his knee. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow ones, the same rhythm, the same pattern. Father and son side by side, sharing a language neither of them had ever been taught. Some people spend their whole lives looking for family in the places they expect to find it. Darnell found his at a bus stop in a stranger who turned out to be the person he'd been missing all along. Not because the universe has a plan, but because kindness has a way of finding the people you belong to, even when you don't know you're looking. The jacket was never about warmth. It was about seeing someone really seeing them when everyone else looked away. It was about choosing to give when you had nothing, and discovering that what you gave away came back to you in a shape you never could have predicted. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to walk forward instead of standing still. And family isn't blood. It's showing up, again and again, even when you're scared, even when you're broken. Especially then. In Darnell's pocket, the wooden knight sat warm against his fingers, sideways first, then forward, always forward. If this story reminded you that kindness doesn't need a reason, and that the people we help might be closer to us than we think, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Have you ever helped a stranger and found out later there was more to the story? Or have you been on the other side, the person someone showed up for when nobody else did? Drop your story in the comments, because those moments, the ones where a small act of kindness turned into something bigger than you ever imagined, those are the moments that remind us why we're here. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, the kind of choices that remind us who we really are. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of each other. This story is fictional, but the issues it explores are very real. According to the HUD Annual Homeless Assessment Report, roughly 35,000 military veterans experience homelessness on any given night in America. The National Center for PTSD reports that PTSD affects up to 20% of veterans who served in operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, with significantly higher rates of untreated cases in Black veteran communities due to systemic barriers and cultural stigma around mental health. Programs like HUD-VASH, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, provide real pathways from homelessness to stability for thousands of veterans each year. They work, but they only work when people walk through the door and ask for help, and that step is often the hardest one. If you or someone you know is experiencing homelessness, PTSD addiction, or a mental health crisis, please reach out. The Veterans Crisis Line is available 24/7. Call 988 and press 1. The SAMHSA National Helpline at 1-800-624-357 provides free referrals and support for substance use and mental health. The National Alliance to End Homelessness at endhomelessness.org offers resources and local program directories. Every character in this story is fictional, but the struggles they face are shared by millions. If this video helps one person reach out for help or see a stranger differently, it's done its job. I wrote this story because I've seen what happens when fathers disappear, and I've seen what happens when they come back. Not every return is welcome. Not every apology is enough. Not every broken thing can be repaired. But I believe in second chances, not because people always deserve them, but because the people who love them do. I grew up watching someone I cared about struggle with the same silence Raymond carried, the same refusal to ask for help, the same belief that leaving was love. It took me years to understand that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones fighting the hardest battles we can't see. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes it human. A $30 jacket can't fix a broken family, but it can start a conversation, and sometimes that's all it takes.